If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're diving into an essential topic, planning for the future, accessing financial or care support and how to start these important conversations. Joining me today is Dean from Grey Matters Consultancy in Cardiff. Dean brings over 12 years of professional experience in health and social care, having worked his way from a frontline home care worker to deputy manager of care homes. Dean also has led an award-winning team at a local home care provider, achieving recognition for innovation, where he still holds an associate director position alongside managing Grey Matters Consultancy in Cardiff. His expertise spans both the delivery of care and the systems that support it, making him the perfect guest to help us to understand how to plan for the future, whether you're seeking care for yourself or a loved one. We'll be talking about how to approach conversations around assessing care or accessing care and financial planning. So let's get into it. First off, Dean, thank you very much for joining me.
It's okay, pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Dean, you've obviously quite a dynamic journey through the health and social care system by the sounds of it, been connected within that for a long time, from frontline roles, moving all the way into leadership. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what sparked your passion in this field and then what led you to then Grey Matters Consultancy?
Yeah, sure. So, in a nutshell, basically, I'd left university and I couldn't find a job anywhere. I was quite shy. I wasn't performing very well in interviews. So I just kind of bit the bullet and thought there's always jobs in care. I'll go and I'll start, have a bit of a stopgap really, and I'll find a job there. Very luckily for me, I was offered a position based on attitude rather than experience, and that's something I wasn't able to kind of bring to the interview stage at any other job. So fast forward, I kind of got a job working and helping people frontline care, as you said, and I just very, very quickly fell in love with helping people. I didn't realize there was potentially, career opportunities. I just thought it was a job, just a stopgap type thing, and just within a number of years continued to kind of accept more responsibility and move up within a career path that I didn't know existed, and just continue to help people in different ways, and it just really sat well within my kind of my ethics, which I sort of explored or understood. That was what was within me previously, but when I was thrust into that role, that really kind of came to the fore, I suppose. And then I moved, as you said, quite dynamically. Things kind of changed throughout my career, and I was offered opportunity after opportunity to progress. And Grey Matters came along. So the owner of the care company that I work for was looking to diversify his business, and he was keen to purchase Grey Matters. It's a franchise across the UK, and so he was keen to purchase that, but didn't quite know, or didn't perhaps have the right person to lead it, and it wasn't something that he had the time to do. And so he offered it to me as a career opportunity, and I thought about it for a little while, and again I thought, well, it sits well with my ethics in helping people. Ultimately, we're trying to raise awareness and help people to access support. So it kind of feels like I've come full circle from, if you think about in the real fundamentals. I used to go and help people have a shower. Now I'm helping them to get a shower, to have in their own home. So it really kind of sits well within my values, and that's why I think I remain so passionate about what I do.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really nice to hear, actually, Dean. As far as I think it's something that we don't reflect on enough. And even before we get into the conversation about your area of expertise and stuff, the fact that you kind of saw care as a career path, that you could see a career path through it. I think there's so many people who, maybe similar to yourself, some people I think choose to get into care because it's something they really want to do, but it's also one of those, it's an easy job to get, but it's not an easy job to do. So some people kind of get it to get started and do something, maybe not realizing of all of the different avenues and different directions that it can take you in with that little bit of experience. So yeah, that's really nice to hear as far as the journey you've been through in that.
Good. Yeah, I mean, and it was something that I continues to be passionate about, because I started working for the home care provider in recruitment, and so I could really kind of talk about that, and try and help people to understand that, I, without sounding, I suppose, big-headed or kind of blow my own trumpet, but I wouldn't have got where I am today if I hadn't have taken that, or someone hadn't taken that chance on me based on attitude and having that understanding that you can grow into different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in no matter what job role you do, you might as well throw yourself into it wholeheartedly. It's kind of if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Therefore, and you never know where that's going to lead to as far as providing those opportunities. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do within Grey Matters Consultancy and who you help? And just tell us a little bit about your service.
Yeah, so Grey Matters Consultancy, as I said, is a franchise across the UK. So we're the only franchise in South Wales, and the active franchise in South Wales. So we're based in Cardiff. Obviously, the same could be said across the UK, across the franchise network. But basically, we are a service that helps people to access support that comes with disability, that comes with vulnerability, that comes with aging. So it was founded by the founder, and she was trying to help her kind of ailing father at the time to access support that she believed was out there. It took a long time to get the information that she needed, and she helped her father. And in the process, she kind of she gained a lot of knowledge, and she thought, how can I help other people to do this? And in a nutshell, that's what Grey Matters became. And she continued to build on that. So we operate within Cardiff, within that local area, and we help people to primarily access financial support, but also things like disability badge, blue badges, helping people understand what things can be unlocked if you do things in the right order, pension credit, things that are linked to vulnerability and disability. So, and just providing advice. And one of the biggest parts of my job is trying to raise awareness. So just having conversations with people, doing talks, doing things like this. So just to try and get the message out there. One, that these things exist. Two, that people are more eligible than they think. And three, that, that also there are services like us that, that really help you to get that support at the very end.
I think planning for the future is something that is a daunting kind of prospect. It's a strange thing. I remember years and years ago that most people spend more time planning their holiday than they do their lives. And which is incredibly true. And there's something that we have against, or many of us have against, kind of making those future plans, because again, maybe it's that seeing that element of our mortality or whatever it is. So it can feel daunting, and there's an awful lot of tasks, and it's a whole new world for most people when they start entering into it of jargon and language and systems and stuff like that can feel quite overwhelming. What are the key elements you think people should be kind of considering when they're thinking about their future and their future care needs?
Yeah, so I mean that is a core aspect of our business, really focusing on the future and elderly people and all the things that come with aging. I think in terms of being proactive, I, as you say, that can be quite a challenge for people, because it's almost, especially just generally speaking within the kind of Western world, it's quite taboo to want to talk about these things, and there's certain generational kind of pride at play, so it does kind of inhibit those conversations. I think importantly, people just trying to be, and I appreciate it's easy to say, but just trying to be open about these things, but equally being conscious of what that means for the person who is going through that. So, the elderly person, if you're trying to kind of plan for the future, and perhaps, the elderly relative, is a big part of that, of course, or is their future that's trying to be planned for. They may be quite hesitant to be involved in that, or they may kind of keep putting it off. And the reality is that quite often, in so doing, that can have a detrimental effect. So one of the big things is that person may feel they don't want to be a burden on the family, to use that word that often is thrown about, and actually, by not talking about it, can have the converse effect. So it's so important just to try and educate people, and make it less taboo. And the best way that I find to do that is by giving people kind of nuggets of information, helping them to just take that first step and have that conversation. Did you know about this? Did you know about this? Have you considered this? Why don't we give this a go? And I think it's more easily said than done. Of course it is. But until you start that process, start down that road, it's not going to happen until most of the time things happen reactively, don't they? So, people suddenly, that mum may be becoming more frail, but we don't have that conversation until mum's had a fall and she's been in hospital for a week. Okay, now we need to do something about it. But actually they could have perhaps prevented that fall, or we could have made things more comfortable, or had a plan for if mum does have a fall, what do we do before we got to that point? And that's the difficulty. But unless we start talking about it, no one will.
Yeah, and so one of the ways I discovered yourself, Dean, is obviously through your TikTok channel that you have. I don't know whether you liked something we did first, or whether I just came across you as a suggested contact. I can't really remember which way around it was.
Yeah.
May have done. On TikTok, we better put that proviso in. It just wasn't down the street. So yeah, you followed me on there, and I came over and discovered your channel as a result of that. And that's why I reached out to you, because I thought it was such a fantastic resource for actually doing exactly what you just said there, of kind of just those little nuggets of information, those little bits of have you thought about, or if you are doing this, or if you're going down this, providing those little sound bites almost, aren't they, as far as here's a little bit of quick advice. And I suppose in some ways that's such a useful tool that people could use to kind of just show, hey, mum, have a look at this video. There's this guy talking about this, or even just the people who are actually reading it themselves, or seeing the video themselves, kind of be reminded, going, yeah, I do need to kind of get on with that. Yeah. Is that why you started that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we as a franchise, of course, there's experience under our belts, and we do often kind of go to events and talks and things like that. But of course, you're at a limited audience. I found through kind of research and a bit of trial and error that it was worth exploring TikTok as a channel because of the exposure it can have, and it took off very quickly. But we are a business. We do have a service that people pay for, but there are plenty, and still to this day, we had another one yesterday. People will message or comment and say, "Thanks to your video, they've not used our service. Thanks to your video, mum now gets the higher rate attendance allowance," or I've had a conversation with dad and he's happy to do this. So, I just wanted to thank you, So it's having the right effect. And ultimately you could say, is that actually detrimental to business? I don't think so, because there will always be people who will go in to do, this is something that you can do yourself, right? Just like lots of things that services can do. So ultimately people can do these themselves. They might just need a push, or a light bulb moment to say, oh, well, okay, mum can't get up the stairs. So, this guy said that in the video. Let me think about it. They look into it, and hey presto, mum's helping. Mum's got enough money to buy a stair lift, and and of course all the benefits that come from that. So, it continues to be. It does bring us customers, but ultimately it's a way of very quickly raising awareness, like you said, and we do have people phone up and say, I've seen you on TikTok, and thank you for your messages. So it's a great tool.
That's it. It is, as you said, it's destigmatizing. It's getting the message out there, and appealing to the generation who may be needing to encourage their loved ones to make those decisions. As I said, there is that perception sometimes. You're too busy. I don't want to put this on you. But then it gets to the point where now it has to be put on them. That's going to put impact on their time significantly more than if that conversation was had kind of early on.
Absolutely.
But obviously, conversations can be around care and financial planning. Obviously, can be quite sensitive, especially when it comes to discussing with family members, talking about these kind of topics and things like that. Have you got any kind of key tips that you'd be happy to give as far as how to open up that conversation and actually in a constructive and a compassionate way?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to remember is that, and it seems like it's a bit of a no-brainer, but just remember that person is losing something of themselves. So it's almost like dealing with grief to a point. So dealing with that grief of their independence. So you need to be conscious of that when talking. So if you're going to have this conversation, don't just throw it around the dinner table. Think about what you're going to say. Think about when you might say it, and try and pick a time when it's when there's a positive interaction, rather than everyone sat around the table at Christmas and I can't do this anymore. It's not. It has to really. It seems awkward to have to plan, but I think that's something that's just plan to a point where you have an idea of how you want to approach it, and think about how you might approach it if you were in that situation. So if you consider, like I said, the grief, the loss of something, then that person. There's generational pride at play. There's all manner of things, and obviously each person is their own, so everyone's personalities can be different. But generally speaking, there can be a bit of a defense as soon as you might mention it. So if there is that defense, let that defense lie and come back to it at another time. It's no point pushing against that. So having those awkward conversations when someone's being defensive is only going to make it a negative conversation and shut down barriers even more so. So it will take a long time with some people, understandably so, because like you said, feels like you're losing part of yourself potentially. And I think the only other thing is just being aware. Being as aware as possible. So doing some research, maybe thinking, there's this video I could show to kind of give you another side of things, or look, here's some numbers. Look, if Dad, if we did look at this, you could get over £5,000 a year. That could mean, you could be less stressed about going up the stairs. You could afford a stair lift. Just trying to appeal to that person's interests and I suppose what makes them tick. So you know your mum and your dad, your loved ones. What do you think would appeal to them, and try and go that route. Again, it is difficult, and it will always be difficult, but thinking about it in a carefully considered way is probably the best thing I could say to help with that.
So do you sometimes have families that are contacting you kind of and wanting to talk about, I'm worried about my loved one, can I just talk to you? I haven't spoken to them about it yet, but I just wanted to kind of get some advice. Is that something you get quite a lot?
Yeah, we get a variety. So we tend to tailor our messaging to the families, because they are the ones who are generally speaking on social media, and those are the ones who are seeking support for mum and dad, who are a bit more hesitant to accept that, for example, if we're talking about the older generation. But we do, and they can phone up and say, look, exactly as you just said. There can be people who have said, I've spoken to mum, I've shown them your video, or they understand what attendance allowance is. We've got it in the post, but she's just a bit unsure, or we don't know how to fill the form in. So there's that. Equally, we do have people, the pensioners themselves, who actually support. So of course that barrier's gone for them, which is a much easier way to support someone. But if we do find that someone is eligible, and we're talking to the daughter of the elderly mother, she may say, great, okay, it does sound like mum is eligible, thanks for your advice, I'll go away and I'll speak to mum now. And then usually it's the case of, yeah, they're happy to have a conversation and maybe move things forward with mum, because there's almost this external person saying, hey, your mum can help. So it's one thing, sons and daughters saying, come on, let's get this sorted. But when someone external, often kind of skews it in favor, really.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for any parent to be parented by their own child, so it's much easier from an external source, and the stranger is the expert. You might know what you're talking about, and therefore worth listening to. So, in case there's any people who obviously aren't familiar with it or haven't necessarily heard of it, especially if they're in the early part of their journey, you mentioned there about attendance allowance. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that and what that means and how that can help families?
Yeah, sure. So attendance allowance is essentially, so lots of people have heard of disability living allowance, or people may call it disability benefits. And then there's PIP as well, which is personal independence payment. So again, that's more commonplace. People have an understanding of that. But attendance allowance is essentially both of those things, but for people state pension age and over. Now, when people first hear about that and they have an awareness of PIP, then they might think, oh, well, I don't want to apply for that because of the negative connotations associated with PIP and the whole kind of assessment process. Now, it's completely different in the way in which attendance allowance is assessed. So attendance allowance is essentially a financial support from the government. So, it is a disability benefit. It is money given to someone to support their I don't want to use the word disability because some people then think that they're not eligible, but it's, for people's impairments, shall we say, and things that kind of can naturally come with age. People might just say, oh, that's just old age, but actually that would make someone eligible. It's a 30-page long form. It's accessible by anyone. Anyone can make the claim. It's a series of questions, and you need to just demonstrate that you have a condition that impairs your daily living that you've had for 6 months or longer. And it means that you need, or you could benefit from, someone being around for things like personal care, perhaps falls, a history of falls and things, or anything that, so you're thinking like breathing difficulties, dizziness, things that are quite severe. If someone was to be left alone and they had these things, how much would it be negative to their health? And the key thing to note for attendance allowance in the different when compared to other disability benefits is that it's not assessed the same. So there's no telephone or in-person assessment for attendance allowance. It's all based on the form, and that's why it's so important to write the form well, because that's the way in which you demonstrate the difficulties that someone suffers with.
What would you say are probably the biggest barriers people face when trying to access financial or care support, and how can they overcome them?
The biggest barriers are the way in which, so if we talk, so attendance allowance, for example, the form is not designed in a way that leads you to best describe difficulties. So that's a very long-winded way of saying it doesn't help you. It's very black and white, so it's yes or no. And if it's a yes, then of course you've got the opportunity to explain the difficulties, but often it makes you think that you should be ticking no, and so then you don't have the opportunity to explain that, because of course life isn't black or white. There's the grey in between. The form doesn't allow for that grey in between, so that's where people need that coaching or that support to help understand how they translate that grey into the black and white of the form. And the same could be said of any disability benefit. So DLA for children is very similar. It's a longer claim form, and there's many tick boxes, and it's very easy to just tick the boxes and then not explain yourself because it doesn't point you in that direction to do so. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers, and also people not understanding they're eligible in the first place. I have many a conversation with people who say, no, I'm fine. I can't get out the bath without, spending half an hour on my knees and doing this, but I'm fine, or the husband saying, well, show Dean how to walk up the stairs then. Oh no, I'm okay. So there's barriers people put in front of themselves, and then the form is the final barrier, which needs a lot of breaking down.
I think people People always struggle, don't they, as far as on either end of the spectrum. Like some people aren't very good at writing a CV because they struggle to big themselves up. But on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to kind of forms like this, people will kind of go, well, I manage, and therefore they won't put all the times that they struggle. And it's kind of encouraging people in some ways to but put your worst day down. Don't put your best day. Don't put your average day. Put your worst day down, because the worst day is the one that costs you the most. It's the one that then impacts on your life the most. And one thing going wrong on that worst day could affect every other day as a result of that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think because that's another reason why it's often good to get kind of an external set of eyes involved, really, because if not only to kind of coax out the difficulties and really encourage you to be honest, but also to think about things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about. So like, again, because of the black and white of the form, it'll say, how do you deal with washing and drying, for example? And it's like, do you have difficulties or need help with washing or drying? Yes or no. So if you're saying no, and of course you're skipping to the next question. If you're saying yes, you're talking about washing and drying, but the fundamental here they're asking is about personal care. Now, we know that, okay, washing is part of personal care, but equally, what about brushing your teeth, cutting your toenails, washing your hair, cutting your hair? All of those things, when you start going down that route, oh yeah, I can't bend down to cut my own toenails, the chiropodist comes in. I can't stand there to wash my own hair, my daughter does it. I can't go to the barbers because I can't get close enough, so my son-in-law does it every so often. And those things, then you're opening people's eyes to understand that, again, it's that grey that you hadn't considered, and you probably wouldn't consider because, like you said, I manage.
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today. So for those who might be kind of, whether looking for themselves or whether looking for a loved one, when it comes to planning ahead, what kind of steps should they be taking to ensure that their future needs are met, both financially, logistically, and everything like that? What are the main things they should be looking at?
So I think it's important to look at the bigger picture. Okay, so what do people want? Was everyone involved in this want to get from thinking about the future? So if it's very clear that I don't know, mum or dad wants to come and live in an annex or wants to come and live with a family, then work towards that. If mum consistently wants to live on her own, then what plans do you need to make in order to help achieve that? And of course, one element of all of those things is going to be potentially considering financial implications of that, whether that's to cover cost of care or to I mean, perhaps if someone's worried about their legacy they want to leave, and wills and things like that. So something that I always encourage people first is to look at a benefits calculator, which is a free resource available online. So people can there's something called Turn to Us, is entitled to you as well. If you just put in benefits calculator, there's plenty of options, and those really help to kind of paint a picture of what could be available to you. If people are worried about again, it depends on the situation, but if people are worried about having to kind of sell their house to cover cost of care or something like that, I'd always advise it's worth having a conversation with a financial advisor, again, and they will potentially talk about benefits and the support that someone could access there financially. But aside from financials, I think it's really important to just to consider all options, and you can't do that unless you've kind of immersed yourself in what options are out there. So people just think, still to this day, people just think, okay, mum's getting quite frail, she needs to go into a care home. But people still don't know that there's there's home care options available to people. Live-in care is a big thing now, as people can kind of live, and there's all manner of things within that spectrum as well. So I would just say to people to just take the time to be proactive. Again, like we said, consider the person at the center of all of this and their emotions that are going to be potentially affected by this conversation. But look at the bigger picture. Is care an option? If so, look at all those options. Is finance a concern? Again, if so, look at that. And perhaps don't look at them in isolation. Bring it all together. Involve the person in the conversation as much as you can. And just, I think it just needs to be aware that it's going to be a long-winded process. So it's being as proactive as possible is probably going to be the best way around it.
Is there a certain, do you recommend a certain, obviously you predominantly work within families supporting those who are older. I take it you do support people across the board though. Is it just elderly or over that age, but anybody who needs additional support?
Yeah, so basically anyone. We tend to focus on the disability, element of things. So we do help with people with PIP to a point, although that's very hard to do for people, and it's quite a traumatic experience often for people receiving that, going through that process. So we need to be very careful with the support that we can give people. But we do help people with DLA as well, which is for people, for children from birth to 16 years old. And I've personally gone through that myself with my daughter as well. So we've got first-hand experience, and we have helped people successfully with that. So the core of the business is the attendance allowance, but you're right. Yeah, we do help people across the board. It is just a different process. Yeah.
Is there, especially when you're moving into the kind of the more moving into care as an older person, that kind of element, do you think would you recommend a certain age that people start exploring it, talking about it, looking at it, or do you think it should be tomorrow? The sooner the better.
I think it's difficult to put an age on, isn't it? Because of course, conditions can come out. I mean, I help people with attendance allowance, for example, who could be just reached state pension age, and then they could be people who are 90 plus, and they're like, oh, I didn't know, or I'm fine, and so there's the age is difficult, but I think you wouldn't be wrong in saying sooner rather than later. I mean, again, it's trying to kind of get past that taboo, isn't it? And actually realizing that it's not a negative thing to have to talk about this. Approach it in a positive way, and think, much like people would have the mindset, okay, well, maybe I should do a will now because I've got a few kids, we've got a house. The next step might be, what do we do? What are the plans for the future? Which probably involves care. If you flat out say, I never want any carers, I want to go into hospice if I'm terminally ill, or I want to stay at home and I want carers coming in, or whatever someone's wishes are. People probably have an idea of that. So start the conversation as soon as you can, and then at least if the worst was to happen, you're going in the right direction.
When you were talking a little while ago, you kind of answered this to a certain degree anyway. But one of the responses I've come across in my own family and stuff is don't put me in a home. and it's that point blank, don't put me in a home. Is that a common challenge that many of your families kind of encounter, and they don't know how to quite navigate that, or they panic about what about when it reaches a point where we've got no option?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't think we encounter it too much because I think people have come to us because they've either taken the time or they've come across something that has helped them to realize that that's not the only option, because attendance allowance, of course, enables someone to stay at home. So if someone's come to the realization they may be eligible, they should explore attendance allowance, they've at least got their eyes open to the fact that care home is not the only option. So attendance allowance can fund a private care home, but the reality is, in most cases, certainly in my experience, it's being used to help someone to live at home. I think for that reason, probably most people, if they are in a care home, probably discount attendance allowance or aren't aware of it because they've just come to the realization that someone needs to go into a home, for example, and don't realize the help is there. So that perhaps is something else that people are missing out on. But yeah, in answer to your question, it's not really something that I encounter too much because of the way I think they've got to attendance allowance, the journey they've come on.
Yeah. Okay. I know you do you do some stuff around like the lasting power of attorney and stuff like that though within your work?
So as a franchise, we do. I personally have taken the view to not do that directly. So, but we do, just in the office here today, we've got someone who does that above another company. So, of course, I work locally with a number of people who have partnerships with a number of people who could offer that service. And then it's about just giving people choice again. So you might say, there's 2 or 3 independent financial advisors who might be able to help with things such as wills or or financial advice or powers of attorney, and then people can take the choice. So I only work with people who I believe have got the same ethics as us, and I get to know them as a person, but still I like to give people choice. And of course there's geographical elements at play, and then you can choose from someone who's the right fit really for that family. But yeah, we don't do it directly. I prefer to kind of keep our expertise kind of focused.
What would you say are when it comes to attendance allowance? We've touched on a few bits and pieces that you've sort of said. The garden was a wonderful example, for instance, but then prevention of falls. Other than caregivers, where have you found that most people find the money most useful in their lives, or the attendance allowance most useful for maintaining their ability and maintaining their independence at home?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of the time it can be just enabling independence through. So, well, another example that someone gave to me was that this lady was quite debilitated by her COPD, so by her breathing difficulties, and then this was just before COVID. I think she was knocked by a bus as she was waiting for the bus, and she found it very difficult to just wait for a bus. Just even standing there was difficult. So then COVID hit, and she became much more isolated, of course. So she was worried about, with her breathing difficulties, worried about going out and about in public transport, not least after being hit by one. So she was quite anxious about that. COVID lifted, and she still had that anxiety and that worry about her breathing difficulties, understandably. So to her, attendance allowance meant that she could comfortably feel it okay to spend the money on a taxi to go and see her family and friends again, who she hadn't been able to see as regularly. So I guess that mental health element again there, in so much that, this taxi was costing like 20 quid plus because her family was quite far away. She felt bad asking her adult son to kind of come back for all the time because of their grandkids and he was running the business, whatever. So it just allowed her the freedom. It allowed her the freedom and the independence to kind of maintain her mental health, maintain her mental well-being, and just be able to kind of go out as freely as she wanted to. It could be just a gardener. It could be funding, putting something aside, knowing that you want to perhaps consider a stair lift in the future. It could be mobility aids. It could just be perhaps having some money back because you've previously forked out for, I don't know, an indoor lift or a walking stick for every room, and just that money then just kind of think, okay, well, I can I can afford to just be a bit more comfortable in my home. I mean, of course, the rising cost of things like heating and things as well is a worry for older people who live alone and might put it off. So again, it just makes people feel a bit more comfortable in their home. Of course, it will vary from person to person, and care is a big element. But if nothing else, it brings independence and choice, I think, is the biggest thing, and that looks different to everyone.
Do you think there's because I'm just kind of thinking from my own family and things like that, kind of you suddenly like sparks off going, oh, I'm wondering if there's some people in my world that actually they should be looking into this and talking about it, which is probably the aim of your TikTok and what you do a little bit, isn't it? Do you find that sometimes it may be more difficult for couples, maybe when it's kids focusing on an older parent living on their own, but when there's two of them because they're looking after each other a little bit? Do you think sometimes that's not perceived well, it's okay because they've got the other person, especially depending on different levels of independence and stuff like that?
Yeah,
is that sometimes
that is
a barrier?
Sorry, that is a question we get often. People think that because a lot of other financial support elements, do ask you questions about your partner or your cohabiter. So, like pension, for example, is affected by the other person and the other income. So, in short, I've helped numerous couples, both eligible in different ways for attendance allowance, bringing in an additional income to their household of over £10,000, which is massive. And yes, the reality is, the husband could be impaired in, X, Y, and Z, and the wife helps them in this way, and then the reverse, the wife has this and this condition, but so the husband will help in that way, or they're very similar and they kind of muddle through together. As long as both are eligible, both can make the claim. We've done that plenty of times. But you're right, it can put people off, and people can approach us and say, there's okay, Dad's got this. And I say, yeah, okay, they are eligible. Yes, I'm happy to kind of help you make the claim. And then through conversation, okay, well, you're saying Mum does this, but Mum can't do that. That's why we want to buy, pay for a carer. Does she get it too? And it's, oh, I didn't know two people could get it, or I didn't know she'd get it for this, and this. So it's really worth, and those things come out in conversation, which is why it's so important to have that conversation, I think, and understanding that just because someone's helping, if nothing else, if someone is helping someone, that's an even bigger tick in the box for attendance allowance eligibility, because it's all about someone being in attendance. If you take that person away for a week, they've gone on holiday, or something happens, they've gone to hospital, all of a sudden, what happens then? You talked about worst day. That's your worst day. That's your worst case scenario. How do you evidence? How do you illustrate how important that other presence is?
Right. So it wouldn't just be, so let's say we had a hypothetical then. We'll go through a bit of a hypothetical. So let's say that we've got a couple. There is no formal diagnosis of disability or anything like that. However, one individual's quite high risk of falling, or tends to fall quite often, for instance. Does have some mobility challenges, but otherwise is pretty independent. And then... but the other person in a relationship is completely independent and does helping. Would that be then, is there the potential there for an actual assessment? Is that, because that seems probably the lowest example I could kind of think of. Kind of like, that's it. There's no diagnosis, nothing else. There's no carers coming in. They can feed themselves. They can do pretty much all personal hygiene things themselves. There's just a risk of they might fall sometimes. So if that person wasn't there, they could be on the floor. Nobody'd know about it.
For a while, yeah.
Yeah.
So falls are a big tick in the box again, because like you say, if no one's around, that person, if they don't have the strength to get up, how long are they on the floor for? They could be on the, and they could dehydrate. They could very quickly become unwell. They won't be able to get to the toilet. So, how do they access emergency support? So that the fall is a massive thing. If someone has a high risk of falls, the hardest thing, if there's no formal diagnosis, and I say hardest thing, it's not particularly difficult, but in that situation would be evidencing that. And the best way to evidence that is through a narrative, which would include, if they have been to hospital for a fall, or they've been to a GP and have mentioned it, then that would be evidence in a medical record. If it's not, again, it's not the worst thing in the world. It wouldn't mean they're not eligible. It would just be a case of, how do you tell that story? And I use the word story not in a fictitious way, but in a way that paints the picture, the reality of the day to day. Because you see a diagnosis, again, we come back to that black and white. It's very clear that's a diagnosis, but there's this grey in between. Somebody might, you think of like dementia, for example, or autism or something. It can be a number of years potentially before someone gets that formal diagnosis. It doesn't mean the symptoms weren't happening before, does it? So in that situation, and equally, I would challenge the person who would say that they can eat well, they can wash fine, it's just that risk of falls. I would challenge them to think, okay, but do they only shower when someone's around in case they're worried about falling? Do they hold on in the shower because they might worry about falling? Do they shower less than they'd like to because they're worried about their mobility? Do they sit down when they're eating and drinking? That kind of thing. So it's all those little, like you said, nuances, and someone like me who could help try and eke that out in conversation. If nothing else, it makes you think differently.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, it's making me think differently, Dean. I've got to think I'm making about 5 referrals. Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? As far as, just that little bit there of, do they always hold on? Because again, you take that away, then we've got a higher level of vulnerability. And just because there is certain situations or circumstances which reduce that vulnerability, if those weren't there, the vulnerability would still be there. That's really interesting. Yeah. And that's I suppose where, as you said, the expertise, years of experience of you doing this allows you to kind of know those nuances that somebody entering this for the first time, or just kind of wondering if there's anything available, is it a bit of a, I suppose they're not going to make it easy to necessarily to access this funding unless you've got somebody by your side to kind of help you to kind of navigate it, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yeah.
So what would you say is, there's 2 things that I think would be nice to kind of draw us to a close with, unless there's anything else that you'd like to talk about. One is that, does there need to be an awareness as far as, changes in legislation and things like that then have an impact on what's available and what people can do in that moment? Does that change, or is that pretty fixed now as far as what's available to them?
In terms of the financial support, you mean available?
Yeah.
So there's no, if a government decides they want to change a disability benefit, then there needs to be careful consultation on that. In short, I would say, as far as I'm aware, there's no reason to be kind of kept up to date through, for legislative kind of changes, because anything that is going to change, if someone is already accessing a benefit like attendance allowance, then they do get communication, around like the financial year, that if the benefit's going to increase, you'd be made aware of that. And any kind of, if you need to renew it for whatever reason, that can happen sometimes, if it's not awarded for a lifetime, then again, you'd have the communication far in advance. But very, very often things are just let sit. I mean, it would be very detrimental for, obviously not to go political, but the winter fuel payments, that the knock-on effect of that has been quite negatively received. So, and of course that wasn't always affecting everyone as well. So you imagine to make a shift to a disability benefit would be massive. So I don't think if people should worry about keeping up to date with things, because anything that is going to change should be and has to be communicated, usually in a letter form.
So what would you say the most commonly asked questions that you get from the people who contact you looking for support?
So the most common question is, my mum has this, are they eligible? or my mum has this condition, are they eligible? And that's so difficult to answer because it's focusing on the black and white. So the way in which I answer that is well, how does that affect you? So I think if anything, the thing to take away from that question, I suppose, is to reframe it and not ask, mum has this, is she eligible? But this happens to mum. Mum is affected in this way. Can we have a conversation? Do you think this should be eligible? I think that's something I try and put across in our videos and try and help to people to understand, because an example, asthma. Yeah. So a lot of people know about asthma. Asthma on paper is asthma. But if you've got, asthma, Mrs. Jones down the road might have asthma and she just takes to take her inhaler when she's walked to the pharmacy and back. And then Mr. Jones, the other end of the street, he's got asthma and he can barely leave his house without, taking a puff. So if you think of it that way, if you just give me a condition and say, is someone eligible, it's very difficult to do that. And another question is probably the one another common one is the one that you said about, can mum and dad both claim it at the same time, for example? So again, helping people understand that it's not income related, it's not means tested.
Yeah, that's it. The first one there, I think that's quite an important one, isn't it? There doesn't need to be a condition to get any kind of support and benefits. So sometimes people might be waiting for that condition, as you mentioned. But would you suggest that is it a good idea for people to potentially keep a diary, especially if it is stuff like, as we said, like falls or additional support required, to kind of log the events or the things that a person finds difficult, to actually start recording them as the journey progresses? Yeah,
in no way would that be negative, and it wouldn't necessarily be accepted evidence in terms of, like, the DWP might not even bother to look at it, but it would absolutely help you to think back to having that conversation with mum that might be difficult, because they don't want to think about the future. If you encourage mum to make that diary, or you're doing it on her behalf, and then you have that conversation, you're trying to be proactive, say, well, mum, I know we don't want to talk about this, but look, you've had a fall every other week here. And then when you come to do your attendance allowance claim, you've got dates, you've got numbers, you've got averages, you've got facts that can't be argued with. You definitely could use that diary as evidence, but it's not as empirical as a prescription list or a diagnosis, but it certainly would add to the case. So I think a number of, like, Citizens Advice and Age UK actually do provide templates for diaries, and they do encourage that might be a useful way into the journey. So yeah.
Because I always encourage that, even for things like diagnosis sometimes, because sometimes people are very good at masking, especially when it comes to elderly and going into dementia and things like that. They could put on a hell of a show for the doctor and put on their best behavior. But then actually, if you went, so this happened last week, ask her about any of those, or ask him about any of those, see whether they actually remember. And it's a way of actually checking and clarifying, as well as obviously hopefully accessing and remembering the things that used to be easy and are now changing as well. I suppose of that as well, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic. I think you've shared a massive amount of information. Obviously, there is always more, and I'll keep watching the TikTok, and I'll definitely put a link over to your TikTok within the show notes, so people can find you and stuff. And I think you're going to be sharing some of these on yours, and we'll share some of yours on ours, because I do think there is a lot of information out there, and some people might feel quite intimidated by going into this world by themselves a little bit, which is what advisors like yourself are here for. But even those little nuggets might spark ideas if I hadn't even thought about that, as far as taking them down those routes. Yeah. So just to finish off then, is there any kind of, if people are looking to get support as far as their future needs for themselves or loved ones, what would be the next step as far as getting in contact with you, Dean, or with any organisation that does a similar thing to yourself? What should they do?
Yeah, I mean, wherever you can, have a conversation. So whether that's with me, or another local Grey Matters franchise, or whether that's even taking a first step to try and talk to someone's at Citizens Advice or Age UK, they can offer kind of support depending on your local area. Just just pick up the phone, have a conversation, drop an email, whatever's easiest for you to just kind of start the ball rolling. I certainly on behalf of ourselves, we could have a conversation and we give you peace of mind right there and then. Cards on the table, we always say there's free support available here and here and here. You can do it yourself, of course, or you can come to us and this is our fee. So but if nothing else, you've had that conversation, you've understood what's available, you know what potential there is out there for support, and then people can make that informed choice, and they know that someone is eligible. If you don't have that conversation with anyone, you don't know whether you're eligible until you've sat down and you've taken 2 weeks to fill in a 30-page long form, you've sent it off, you've waited 10 weeks, and then it's a no. Is it really a no? Or have you just done it perhaps not as well as you would have? So yeah, have a conversation. 10 minutes could be worth £5,000.
Yeah, that's a good pitch. That is, but important for people to know, because £5,000 can be, per year could be significantly changing to somebody's well-being and life. So it's really, really important. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Dean. Well, I'd say to all listeners out there, if you found anything that we've spoken about useful, interesting, or informative, or you think anybody out there within your world might benefit from some of the stuff that Dean and I have been speaking about, please do like, comment, and share this podcast over to them, or any of the shorts that we have, and make sure they then can get in contact with either Dean or others that do a similar role, and maybe, as you said, just open up that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time today, Dean.
Yeah,
really nice to chat to you. Cheers. Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature, and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict, and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience, and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities, or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation, and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.